It started out like any other quiet Thursday morning. I was sipping my coffee, enjoying the rare peace before the noise of the day set in. That calm didn't last long. A loud rumble echoed down the street, and I glanced out the window to see a large delivery truck backing into my driveway. Confused, I stepped out onto the porch just as a few men began unloading folding chairs, round tables, and a large white event tent. I watched, stunned, as they moved with practiced ease across my front yard like they'd done this dozens of times before, which they probably had, but never at my house. "Excuse me," I called out to one of the workers, trying to keep my tone civil. "What's going on here?" He barely glanced at me. "Set up for the wedding on Saturday. The HOA said it'd be here." I blinked. "What wedding?" "The Williamson wedding. Big one. Ceremony and reception. All outside." Now I was past confused and bordering on furious. "At my house? No one told me anything about a wedding. I didn't agree to this." The worker shrugged. "Not my job to know that, ma'am. We were told by the HOA this was the new venue." I felt my pulse race as I pulled out my phone and dialed the HOA president, Karen Wilkins. The name alone made my jaw clench. Karen was a woman who treated our suburban neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom. She lived 3 streets over in a house that hadn't seen a welcome mat since 1995, yet acted like she owned every blade of grass in the HOA's jurisdiction. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hello? Karen?" I said, trying not to shout. "Why is there a wedding being set up in my yard?" She let out a long, theatrical sigh like I was the unreasonable one. "Oh, that. It's just for a few hours on Saturday. The clubhouse has water damage, and we had to relocate the event last minute. Your property has such a lovely open front, yard, and a beautiful view for pictures." "You didn't ask me," I snapped. "You didn't even tell me." "I sent out a memo," she said casually, as if that was a sufficient legal agreement. "And you didn't reply, so I took it as implied consent." "I never saw a memo, and silence is not consent," I said. "You can't just give my property away." Karen was quiet for a moment before replying with a sugar-coated threat. "Well, the HOA guidelines allow for temporary community use in emergencies. I'm sure if you read them." "I have read them," I interrupted. "There is nothing in the bylaws that lets you hold a private event on someone's private property without written permission, especially not a wedding, with over 100 guests." "Well," she said, "it's a bit late now. The vendors have been booked and we can't disappoint the bride." I hung up before I said something I'd regret, or maybe not regret. I stood in my yard watching strangers set up a stage for a live band while my blood boiled. How dare they? How dare she? By noon, the yard looked like a wedding venue straight out of a Pinterest board. White chairs in neat rows, floral arrangements being tested, and a giant tent partially constructed. My own driveway was blocked by catering vans, and one man actually had the audacity to ask if I'd mind parking elsewhere until Sunday. I walked back inside, slammed the door, and immediately began digging through HOA documents I had stored in a folder labeled Neighborhood Nightmares. I reread the sections on property use, homeowner rights, event permits, and just as I suspected, everything Karen had done was completely illegal. No permit had been filed for a large gathering. No neighbor approval had been obtained, and absolutely no homeowner, especially this homeowner, had given consent. Then came the bombshell. In one of the planning emails forwarded by a concerned neighbor who had overheard the gossip, Karen had pretended to be me. She used a fake email address with my name to communicate with the wedding planner and vendors. She'd signed rental agreements. She'd even sent pictures of my yard to vendors with fake enthusiastic captions like, "We can't wait to host this beautiful wedding." My stomach turned. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was impersonation, forgery, fraud. By dinner time, the front of my house looked nothing like my home. I didn't even recognize it. Guests were scheduled to arrive in just 2 days. Karen hadn't just crossed a line. She'd bulldozed over it and kept walking. I couldn't even begin to imagine the kind of chaos this wedding would bring to my property. Food, noise, possible damage, drunk guests, and the general violation of privacy. I spent most of that evening pacing back and forth in the living room, staring out at the circus being built in my front yard. The nerve, the sheer audacity. Part of me wanted to march outside and flip over every single chair. Another part wanted to call the police and report an unauthorized event being built on my land. But I knew Karen. She always slithered out of direct confrontation. She'd twist it to make it seem like I was the one causing problems. So instead, I grabbed a legal pad and wrote everything down. Every infraction, every email, every photo. I called a lawyer friend who lived a few blocks away. After I explained the situation, he was silent for a moment and then said, "You've got a case, and not just civil. This crosses into criminal territory. Want to really hit back?" I paused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, "don't just sue her, take back control in a way she'll never forget." And that's when the idea hit me. Something bold. Something that would make sure no one ever pulled something like this again. Something that involved a demolition company. The next morning I woke up with a singular focus. Justice. This wasn't just about an unauthorized wedding anymore. It was about my rights, my property, and the dangerous precedent Karen and the HOA were trying to set. If she could hijack my house for a private event once, what would stop her from doing it again? What would stop her from doing it to someone else? I began compiling everything. Emails, photos, screenshots of texts, timestamps of when the setup, crews arrived, and even video from my security cameras showing the trucks rolling in. I wanted a rock-solid case. My friend Alan, the local attorney I'd called the night before, came over later that afternoon. He reviewed the evidence on my laptop with a grim expression. "You weren't exaggerating," he muttered. "This isn't just a civil issue. She forged your identity to vendors, that's wire fraud. And the HOA using your property without permission? That's trespassing, at minimum." "What about the permits?" I asked. Alan nodded. "There are none, I checked. There's nothing filed with the county for an event of this size. No zoning clearance, no crowd control authorization, no sanitation, no insurance. And because they pretended you authorized it, you'd be liable if anything went wrong. Injuries, property damage, whatever. They're making you the fall guy." That last part hit like a slap. They hadn't just trespassed. They'd exposed me to serious legal risk. If someone tripped over a cable, drank too much and got in a car crash, or if a piece of that massive tent came loose and injured someone, I would be on the hook. Alan leaned back, arms crossed. "You want to sue her now or after the wedding?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding. "Neither." He raised a brow. "You're letting it go?" "No. I'm going to end it, before it even happens." I told him my idea, and at first, he looked stunned. But then slowly, a smile crept across his face. "That's diabolical, and perfectly legal, if you follow through the right way." "I will," I said firmly. "I want them to regret ever stepping foot on my lawn." The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and logistics. I found a demolition contractor willing to take on a same-day prep project. Since the wedding venue area was technically my porch and landscaping, both on my property, I was within my rights to have it altered or removed, especially since no structures were attached to the foundation of the house. I didn't need a special permit for minor demolition like removing decking and decorative structures, especially when I was repairing water damage that, as far as anyone else knew, had become an urgent hazard. The crew agreed to arrive late Friday afternoon, just in time. Meanwhile, Karen had been radio silent. I guessed she assumed I had given in, or maybe she thought she'd scared me off. Her ego wouldn't let her believe I had the guts to ruin her picture-perfect wedding plan. That suited me just fine. Friday afternoon arrived like a storm. I watched from the living room window as a crew of landscapers and demolition workers rolled up. They came with equipment, saws, hammers, tarps, and a mini excavator for the old. Stone steps leading down into the yard, the decorative archway, the gazebo-like patio I'd once used for small barbecues, the garden border fence, all of it was marked for removal. Just as the first swing of the sledgehammer landed, a shrill voice echoed across the street. "What the hell is going on?" Karen, dressed in a beige blouse and matching rage, came storming down the sidewalk, waving her phone like it was a sword. "You need to stop this immediately," she screeched, stepping onto the lawn. "This area is being used for a wedding. Tomorrow. You are ruining everything." I turned to the demolition lead. "Keep working." He nodded, and the crew continued tearing out the deck boards and removing support beams. Karen spun toward me, mouth open. "You can't do this." I folded my arms. "Actually, I can. It's my property, and I'm making some last-minute changes." "This is outrageous," she shouted. "We have a contract." "Where?" I asked calmly. "Signed by whom? Because if you mean the forged emails you sent pretending to be me, I've already forwarded those to my lawyer and to the police." Paled for a split second before snapping, "You're going to ruin a bride's special day." The next few hours were beautiful chaos. By the time the sun started to set, my front yard looked like a construction zone. The tent had been removed for safety. The flower arch was broken down. The stage had been completely leveled. Fresh lumber and stacked bricks were placed along the perimeter to give the impression that a major renovation project was underway. Karen didn't come back. Not that night, but the wedding planner did. Around 8 p.m., a frantic woman knocked on my door. She was holding a clipboard and trembling with panic. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, voice shaky. "But we were told this location was confirmed. What happened?" I gave her a copy of a cease and desist letter I'd drafted and emailed earlier that day. It explained the event was unauthorized, the site was unsafe, and any attempt to use the property would result in trespassing charges. She read it slowly, her face falling. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. "Neither have I replied. "But there's a first time for everything." She left quietly. No raised voices, no arguments, just defeat. And as the last truck pulled away and my yard sat in dusty, disassembled silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years living under this HOA. Power. Saturday morning dawned with an eerie quiet. Birds chirped softly overhead. The wind carried the faint scent of freshly torn up grass, and my front yard looked like a battlefield. Piles of rubble where the decorative porch once stood, scattered splinters of wood from the dismantled deck, and large plastic tarps covering areas still awaiting cleanup. It was perfect. I sat on my front steps, what remained of them anyway, nursing a coffee and waiting for the storm to arrive. Not the weather kind, the Karen kind. Sure enough, just after 10 a.m., a caravan of vehicles began rolling down the street. First came the florist van, then a catering truck, followed by a DJ van with massive speakers strapped to the roof. Then came a few sedans filled with what I assumed were early arriving guests. Finally, a sleek black limo turned the corner, slow and elegant, gleaming in the sun. The bride had arrived. I didn't know her. I didn't care to. But I did feel sorry for her. She probably had no idea what Karen had done. No idea that her special day was built on a lie, on a foundation of arrogance and forged signatures. The guests and vendors began piling out, looking around in confusion. The neatly manicured yard they were promised was now a dusty demolition site. Bits of rebar and concrete chunks dotted the once green lawn. A portable toilet sat on the sidewalk, untouched and clearly misplaced. One of the florists held a bouquet of pink roses and just stared, slack-jawed. Then, the limo door opened. Out stepped the bride. She looked beautiful, no doubt. Lace gown, hair done to perfection, makeup flawless. She clutched her bouquet like it was the last piece of sanity she had left. But the moment she saw the mess in front of her, the smile evaporated. A high-pitched voice shrieked from across the street. Karen was back. She came marching up the sidewalk, this time in a lavender pantsuit that made her look like a wedding planner from a 90s sitcom. Her heels clacked on the pavement as she stormed over to me. "You," she spat. "What the hell did you do?" I sipped my coffee. "Morning, Karen. Lovely day for a wedding, don't you think?" "You think this is funny?" she snapped. You deliberately sabotaged this event. You've embarrassed the entire HOA. You've ruined everything. No, I said, rising to my feet. You ruined everything. You lied. You impersonated me. You signed contracts in my name and tried to exploit my property without permission. I warned you. I had authorization, she screamed. Emergency community use clause, which applies only to common property, not private homes. You know that. You chose to ignore it. Karen turned, gesturing wildly at the bride, who now stood surrounded by confused guests and stunned vendors. Do you see what you've done? Look at her. She's devastated. I didn't plan her wedding. You did. I'm not the one who hijacked someone else's yard like it was a rentable venue on Airbnb. You broke the law, Karen, and now you get to face the consequences. Just then, a police cruiser turned onto the street. Karen's face turned white. 2 officers stepped out, 1 male and 1 female, both calm and professional. The male officer approached me. Are you the homeowner? Yes, sir. We received a call about an unlawful demolition during a scheduled community event, he said. Mind explaining? I nodded and handed him the folder I'd prepared. Inside were all the documents: property deed, photos of the setup, the forged emails Karen had sent, the statement from my attorney, and the cease and desist letter. I even included copies of the county's regulations and HOA bylaws. The officer flipped through them, brow furrowing. The female officer walked over to Karen and began questioning her. She was visibly agitated, flailing her arms and trying to redirect the blame. He did this to punish me. He's unstable. Look at what he's done. The male officer turned back to me. This all checks out. You had every right to remove the structures. There was no permit, no legal authorization, and the use of your name without consent is serious. Have you filed a police report for the forgery? I'll be doing that today. He nodded. Good. I'd recommend pressing charges. It's clear you were within your rights. As for this event, he glanced at the wedding crowd, who were still milling around awkwardly. They need to clear out immediately. I watched as the officers walked over to the DJ, caterers, and florist, instructing them to pack up. The bride stood silently, tears streaming down her face as the dream day she'd imagined dissolved around her. One of the bridesmaids glared at Karen with an expression of betrayal. Someone else muttered, "We should have booked the park." Vendors began unplugging equipment and loading trucks. The limo driver stood by awkwardly, waiting for instructions. Karen tried once again to rally the guests. Don't go. We can move it down the street. There's still time. But it was no use. The damage was done. A woman, possibly the bride's mother, approached Karen and slapped her. I mean, a full-on open-palmed slap across the cheek. Karen stumbled back, hand to her face, stunned. No one intervened. Minutes later, the guests began leaving. Cars drove away, trucks rolled off. The limo backed up and slowly disappeared down the road. And just like that, the chaos faded into silence. Karen didn't speak. She stood in the middle of my ruined yard, alone, eyes wide and red, mouth twitching. I thought she might scream again, but instead, she just turned and walked away. No apology. No acceptance of responsibility. Just silence. Later that afternoon, I went down to the local precinct and officially filed charges: forgery, fraud, impersonation, and unlawful use of private property. My attorney began working on a civil suit against both Karen and the HOA board, several of whom had signed off on her plan without verifying a single thing. It was going to be messy, but I wasn't backing down. In the days that followed, word of the incident spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years stopped me at the mailbox to offer congratulations, hugs, and gossip. Some even offered help rebuilding the front of my home. Apparently, Karen had made a lot of enemies over the years, and no one was surprised. She'd finally gone too far. At the next HOA meeting, attendance tripled. Residents were furious, demanding Karen's removal. She tried to play the victim, but no one was buying it. The board held a vote, and for the first time in over a decade, Karen Wilkins was unanimously ousted from her position as HOA president. She moved out of the neighborhood 2 months later. I spent the following weeks rebuilding my front yard. A new deck, a smaller but stronger porch, fresh landscaping, and security cameras with audio this time. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace, reclaiming what was mine, and I had earned it. What Karen failed to understand was that rules exist for a reason, not to control people but to protect them. She thought she was above the law. She thought she could bully her way into anything she wanted, even someone else's home. But she forgot one crucial thing. You don't mess with a homeowner who knows the law and has a demolition crew on speed dial.